I'm Piotr Achinger from Institute of Nuclear Physics, Polish Academy of Sciences, and I have a question to Professor Bourguignon. You've mentioned in one of your first slides that competing for talents is one of the objectives of ERC. So I'm curious to know whether there are plans for supporting the whole process that leads to the excellence level that is handled by ERC directly. And I think that everybody agrees that competing for talents start early. I mean in preschool even. So I've also noticed in the European Commission funding scheme there is a pillar 3 where innovation ecosystems are mentioned. So in this case, for competing for science, to be constructive, I could imagine something like pan-European or at least nationwide distributed ecosystem dedicated not to innovations but to discoveries, something like incubator of scientific discoveries. And in such an ecosystem, young people could really meet the science, could touch the science, and could decide that science could be their career target. So are there any plans or ideas in this direction? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I think before I try to answer it directly, there are just some figures that I think it's very important to keep in mind. First of all, if you look at the share of the funding for research in Europe, which is coming from the European Union, which is of course a collective decision of the countries, because that's what they decide on the global budget, it's only 8%. And then you remember that ERC was 17% of this framework program, so ERC is 1% of the funding of research in Europe. So hoping that 1% is going to solve all problems is certainly not actually reasonable. That was one comment. The second comment I want to make, so it means that still for the support of research, it's the national support which is really the dominating factor in terms of activities. In the case of ERC, as you understand, I mean, the way it has been set up was by following requests by the scientific community, and for I think that's why the schemes which have been put in place were the ones that the scientific community felt was missing, in the sense of having absolute priority to ideas and leaving the total initiative to researchers. And then the remit given to ERC is to implement this, that is to really get projects, select them and fund them, and of course follow them, because I mean the agency is following the project very carefully. So now, and of course you're completely right in saying that research is an ecosystem which has various components. You have to bring people to a certain level, then you have to help them develop in different ways. And of course, these different components are taken care of in different countries by different structures. And actually, in my function as president of ERC, I could measure the incredible diversity of the systems in Europe. And therefore, of course, that's one lesson I learned from my mandate, was that I don't think for any of the problems that we see, there is a uniform solution. And therefore, we have to adapt each time to solutions, so one has to be very careful about this. Of course, there are some general features which are critical, that is, if you are missing some structure in a given country, usually it leads to some kind of a rupture in this ecosystem. And so this is why, for example, one thing which the Commissioner Moedas has been identifying at European level as something missing was that the support to innovation was very much focused on predetermined areas, and there was, for innovation, no open space, in a sense, no place where bottom-up would be the rule. And that was his main motivation to create the EIC, European Innovation Council, which is being put in place. I mean, there's some kind of pilot still within Horizon 20 with this name, but it doesn't really reflect what Commissioner Moedas had in mind. And of course, the true full-fledged EIC will be in existence with the next framework program. And there, for sure, the idea would be to build the bridge that you, if I understood well your question, you suggest should exist, namely to accompany further researchers if they have a good project there. And so for EIC, it will be again, as for ERC, a totally open place in the sense that you can apply. That's why it's called open innovation. If you have an idea of developing a new product, a new business model, a new economic activity, then you can come to EIC. And of course, the EIC will be providing public money through support by typically providing a grant, but also will be providing loans, will be providing also actually equity, which of course means in terms of organization, a quite different organization than the one we have. In our case, I mean, the agency which is taking care of ERC is, I can say, fantastically efficient, but in the sense the models are very clearly defined. In the case of EIC, I mean, something has to be invented because you have to create this kind of a joint work, joint setting between private and public sector, which is not easy at all because then you also have to deal with the intellectual property right and how are you going to share that? So just to come back to this, one thing which the ERC Scientific Council has identified from the first day, many people had the feeling that the creation of EIC would damage the ERC. And it was not our position. Our position was from day one to try to follow up what the EIC was doing, and particularly to talk to people in charge of defining it. I mean, the high-level group which was in charge of that. And this will continue. Now there's a group similar to the European Research Council Scientific Council, which is established for EIC. And there will be some kind of common discussion between the two groups. And one thing which will be put in place, I think it's pretty clear, so there will be two levels for this EIC. One is accelerator, and the other one is pathfinder, which are two different models of developing innovation. But for sure, in the case of ERC projects, and in particular the ones who have been supported by proof of concept, the EIC people already spontaneously, we didn't press them, felt that for some of the ERC project, there should be a very direct way of getting the support from EIC, not us, their money, not our money. So I think this is probably the right way, because you see the remit of ERC should be focused on science. And I think as soon as we try to mix things, of course, we did, I mean, it was a decision of Scientific Council to introduce proof of concept. I think it was a very wise decision because we want to show that there is the scientists are not in the ivory tower. But again, in our case, we want them to decide whether they want to do it or not do it. We are not pressing them. They do what they feel. And so I think, but we know that the amount of money we provide, which is 150,000 euro, if you want to create a company, I mean, chances that it's enough is just not there. So you need totally different scale of money. And then this will be taken care of by ERC. So this is one, I mean, the setting which has to be put in place. It's still being looked into, and the structure is not yet available. For example, one thing which for ERC has been decisive was the creation of the executive agency taking care of ERC, which now has been in existence for 10 years. Now the question is, what will be the structure taking care of EIC? It's not yet clear. And from what I told you, it's even more complicated than for the agency for ERC. And so you need people also with business experience who are able to handle all the things which are around intellectual property right. And all these things are quite complicated, and particularly because the environment is not exactly uniform. From one country to the next, the rules are not exactly the same. And so the people who will take care of that, I mean, we'll really have to have a new type of expertise, which at this moment I don't think exists really. So just to say that your question is completely legitimate, and we have to consider this as a really global thing, and that's the idea of the framework program, which is supposed to provide these kind of different ways of approaching the contribution of research to development, which of course is the idea. As scientists, we know that the idea of telling the researcher what to do is not the right solution, and we really fight to have enough space for really initiative for researchers, and the researchers should be given a chance to develop what they feel is the most exciting things to do. And very often we know, and we have plenty of examples at ERC, of applications or even leading to really economic activities, and when the people started, they had no idea they would be doing that. No idea. They were just doing science, and excellent science. So that was making the difference. So I think we really fight, and I think part of our job, but maybe also your job, is to convince the politicians that this idea, you will do that, and I'm going to put that much money into this, and this will solve the problem. This is not the way it's working, because sometimes a small investment has a huge impact, and sometimes a big investment has very little impact. So it's very difficult to know a priori how things will be done. It's completely legitimate to have some top-down funding of research, but there should be enough room for bottom-up funding of research. I hope I gave some indications on what is the landscape at the moment, with still question marks, because, for example, for EIC, nobody really knows how it's going to function, and I'm sure it's going to function, but you need creative people involved in this process.
Oh, yeah. I would like to add just a brief comment to what was said about, say, support for researchers thinking about an ERC grant. So there is a funding scheme in NCN, Uvertura. This is just fellowship schemes to visit ERC grantees. It's a great opportunity to have money to spend 3 to 6 months in a team just working on an ERC grant, ERC funded grant. What the problem is that when we looked at the number of applications, that number was very disappointing here in Poland. Yeah? So there are some, say, tools, schemes that could support people, but if people don't apply, yeah, we have no chance.
Hello, my name is Marcin Kuźniak from the Nicolaus Copernicus Astronomical Center. I have 2 questions. One is maybe a little technical about the principal investigator evaluation to Professor Jajszczyk. Another question a bit more general. So we heard about the publication list in the application, and that things like Hirsch factor, citation count, number of papers are not the primary factor in evaluation. It's more the overall impact and quality. And yet, I believe the application requires to give these numbers, the impact factor of the journal and the number of citations. I'm not sure if that's the latest format, but that was my impression. So I'm just curious how this is happening. Is this now relying on a pre-existing knowledge of experts, narrowly focused experts, or not? The second question is about, well, we saw that a fair chunk of applications were from the UK, and there are schemes like Twinning where also UK is a potential partner country. So what is the plan for Brexit in broad terms? If UK is going to remain an associated country, for instance, then it still qualifies for Twinning, for ERC, I don't know. Would they still be able to supply this enormous number of applications and receive a fair amount of funding? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe the Brexit question is simpler. We simply don't know. Even Boris Johnson don't know. Yeah, so yeah. Oh, definitely. But I was.
Well, I can give you the figure, the present figure you imagine from what you saw. The present number of ERC contracts active in the UK is 1,100, employing more than 5,000 people. So imagine if there was a Brexit with no deal and the UK stopping paying what it's supposed to pay, then the impact is massive. Of course, the British government committed itself to continue, but just the logistic of taking over 1,100 grants, I mean, takes months. I mean, automatically. I mean, you don't overnight create 1,100 grants. So the impact could be absolutely massive. That's very clear. So we don't know. Maybe things will be smooth and everything will go almost unchanged. But it can also go to the other extreme, which would be an absolute disaster, because the numbers are really huge, I mean, as you've seen. Concerning evaluation, I think this is, of course, depends very much on your discipline. Probably you are a biologist, I presume, from what you said about H index. No? Oh, physicist, okay. Because in some disciplines, like mine, mathematics, we don't know what it is. It doesn't exist. We never look at it. We just try to read the papers. So that's one way of operating. I must say that at the level of Scientific Council, we have been battling that really the evaluators look at the papers rather than use kind of automatic indices. And since I'm doing very often the briefing for panel members, after that they do what they feel is appropriate. We never change any of their decisions. We insist that they really just discuss the papers, have a discussion on substance, not on numbers. And of course, I'm sure some people still look at that, but I think it's the pressure to avoid using this kind of mechanical way of ordering applications. I think we have made some progress on that, and I really hope this is the case. And one of concrete steps we have taken is that people, I will tell you, and one more reason why we did that, was to ask people not to give their full list of publications, but to choose their 5 best publications. Because then it forces people to focus on what they feel has been the most important things they have been doing. I'm pretty sure that some evaluators still try to get some more information. But one reason also why we did that was we know that it's a fact that women are publishing less than men. So then if you are impressed with a huge list of publications, then for women it will be more difficult to impress with a long list of publications, because in average, women publish less. And that's why I said counting publication is not what we look for. We look for quality. So I think that should make the difference and should be the...
I can add that one of my duties as the member of the Scientific Council is to observe panels. So I sit during the panel proceedings and listen, watch. I say nothing, but of course when I write just a brief report to my colleagues within the Scientific Council, just to improve procedures if possible. But I go to different panels from different areas, not only my area, which is information technologies, telecommunications, but also to panels in social science and humanities, in life sciences, and I observed many panels over the last 3 years, and I heard the name Hirsch only once, said by an expert, yeah? Because they are discussing what was the impact of publications of those people who are assessed, and only once was mentioned. Somebody mentioned Hirsch, and anyway, it was an expert from Poland. Yeah, I have to admit.
I think we are running out of time, but we will still be around. We will have workshops that you can still ask your questions. And please note that now we will be splitting into 3 groups.